This story has to do with a little lad of the Winnebago tribe, supposedly, where his name was Ho-Chunganika, the little Winnebago. He had two sisters who had married supposedly great warriors and good hunters. And so they supposedly went on a war journey or something, and they took this little boy with them. They were quite famous warriors, so the parents of the little boy didn't object to them taking him along. But as they journeyed along, they ran into the enemy, and there probably was a group, and they hid the little boy in a hollow log to keep him out of harm's way, and they were out there doing battle. And in those days, according to the rules of battle, they had carried these feathered staffs, which some call flags. And the other war party also had carried these markers with them, and so where they're going to do battle, they would sort of set up their markers, and within this, within the markers is where they would. It was a contest, you might say, for being good, handy fighters and so forth. Square ring. But this day they met some warriors of very tough, good fighters, and so the brother-in-laws, they picked up their staffs and they retreated. Said, maybe we have a little better luck in this area. So then they put their staffs down, and the enemy party brought forth their staffs and then blocked off their area of line of defense, and then this is no man's land between the markets, so this where they were doing battle again. But I guess the brother-in-laws didn't fare so well that time, so they deserted the field, took their markers and ran away. So they lost the battle that day. In the meantime, this little boy was in this, was hidden in this hollow log, and the enemy spotted him in there, and they grabbed him and said, this would be a nice thing to take back to our uncle whose own son died several months ago, and it would make him happy to bring this boy back alive to him. So he was captured and taken along with this warriors back to their camp, and as they came to this old man's lodge, they said, "Hey, uncle," he said, "we brought you a son." So he comes out and he looked at the lad and said, "Wow, fine. I'll make a nice boy out of him. He's nice." And so he adopted him as his son, and when you go through one of those things, rituals and so forth, he is almost as good as your own blood kin. So he was loved by the old warrior, and began to receive training in battle, tactics, and so forth. But the ones that captured the little boy always came back from somewhere, maybe battling somewhere, and came by, and they were kind of braggarts that said, this little Winnebago here, he's kind of ugly. He said, I went to do battle with these Winnebagos over yonder there, and oh boy, he said, I battled with one real handsome, not ugly like this one. I beat him. In fact, I got his scalp or something like that. But this kind of treatment and stories sort of irked the little boy to a point where he just kind of was disgusted with these fellas coming back and ribbing him all the time about him being ugly, and the warriors that got killed out there were much handsomer than he was. And so time passed until he became a man, and he became a warrior and a good fast runner and a good hunter. Well, he was kind of a super lad in that camp, and also he had made friends with one of the tribesmen there, and the two lads did things together, you might say. And so very craftily, the little boy, little Winnebago, Ho Chunganika, would ask questions of his adoptive father and said, where do you think I come from? And so these questions were put to the old warrior very craftily. And well, he figured that the boy wanted to know, so he'd tell him certain landmarks, and that's where your other people are. And so the boy remembered these landmarks, and sometimes in journeying around, he came across some of them, and he began to plan to escape sometime or just journey over to where his real people were. So these people that adopted him, they would go hunting now and then, and on these treeks, why, little Winnebago, he would go along, maybe he'd be up in a lead, he'd run out there somewhere and kill some game, and then he'd backtrack around and he'd kill some of these warriors who always talked to him about him being so ugly. He was getting them out of the way, or he was avenging himself, his feelings by killing them. And so pretty soon the people begin to say, someone is killing us. They're always attacking us from the rear here, and better watch out. So they put the good warriors back there, but that didn't stop somebody from killing them on these hunting treeks or journeys going across land and so forth. So it so happened one time his friend was along, and so little Winnebago told him, he said, we got the deer for supper and so forth. You stay here and watch it. I got to go back over here and look at something. So in the meantime, little Winnebago runs to the rear again, and he slays several of those bragging warriors that said he was ugly. And so that evening they told that as they sat down to eat, because when they checked up on him, these two friends were up in front, and they brought the deer in, supposedly for the meal. And there they're told that somebody was stealthily killing off their warriors at the rear part of the column. And so then they're going to put the real sharp-eyed ones, the real detectives of the tribe, you might say, they were going to place them at the rear as a rear guard to apprehend whoever it was doing this. And so it happened that as they went along, and little Winnebago began to look at the landmarks. Now, we're not too far from my own people's place. So the friend said to him, why do you always go back there? Well, he said, those guys brag so much and say I'm ugly, and the Winnebagos that they kill are much handsomer than I am. And he said, I just made up my mind I'm going to get those fellows. He said, and that's what I've been doing. Well, the friend said, well, if you're doing this, why didn't you tell me? He said, I'd like to get some of those braggarts too. So it was that both of them up in front, they both went back and got rid of or killed several of the sharp warriors that was put as rear guard, and then they took off with the scalps. So it was that the people went back and looked at these tracks and compared them with the tracks of the lead warriors, and here there was the tracks of the little Winnebago and his friend, and so they went back to camp to notify that these two were the ones who were killing their warriors. So they declared war on them. In the meantime, the little Winnebago took his friend with him and went back to his people. He still remembered how to speak the language, so he told them who he was and so forth. There was a great rejoicing over there, and the return of their son, and he brought his friend along. So he said, if he's a friend of yours, he's welcome. So it happened that while they celebrated, this enemy from where they escaped had sent out forces to recapture these people and punish them. Well, while this was going on, the celebration going on, this detachment or troop was coming nearer and nearer. They knew where to go. And so the scouts come running in, and we have a war party upon us here, and just in a few minutes we'll be at battle. So they prepared themselves for battle, and the two friends were sort of laying in ambush close together, and lo and behold, they saw their adopted father coming out there, and he was dressed in his war regalia, which was a red buffalo head. They call it a buffalo head cap. I guess that must have been made from a buffalo with the horns, and the fur was pretty light colored, sort of reddish, so they called him the Red Buffalo. I guess maybe that might also have been his name. But the old man was out there, and well, he was pretty frisky and moving around out in battle, and so the two friends said, hey, we don't want to kill him. He was as good as a father to us. What we got to do is capture him. We'll wait till he gets down here, and then we'll jump on him. We'll capture him. So in the meantime, they had framed up on him what they were going to do, so they waited for the old man with a red buffalo head warrior's cap on to come down the line, swinging his war club amongst the other battlers and so forth. And when he got close, the two friends went out. One grabbed him by the legs, and the other one jumped on him, and they held him down. He said, hey, Father, what are you doing here? Well, he says, I couldn't quite help myself. He said, I didn't want to come, but since you were involved and I'm your father, he said, they forced me to come to maybe do you in, but I'm glad you captured me. Well, I said, Father, you better not be in this place here. You're going to get killed. We'll take you over here and tie you to a tree so you won't involve yourself in the battle. So they tied him up and tied him to a tree and captured him, and then it returned to battle, which didn't last much longer. They drove off the invaders, And then they returned to this tree and untied their other father and then took him into camp and introduced him. So as a token of friendship, he gave his red buffalo head war cap to the Ho-Chunga's real father. Excuse me. And that is still with the Winnebagos today. It must have been a true story because they still have this red buffalo head war cap. I'm going to speak today, or at this time, on Ho-Chungara. Ho-Chungara is the name that the Winnebago tribe of Indians have called themselves, the Ho-Chungara. It has it's kind of a religious setting. It goes back to the beginning of time when Mauna, the earth maker, had created the earth. However that was done, I don't know, but after creating everything that was supposed to be on there, he had made those that walk on two legs in his own image or in his likeness to inhabit the earth. They needed to have some overseers to sort of oversee the creation in certain parts, in the skies above the earth and on the earth and in the waters and under the earth. They had to have supervision or overseers. So he had called unto himself some Hupini Harajide. That means he's some kind of a angelic creature, helpers, his helpers wherever he needed help. And he brought 12 of them. He called 12 of them and into his presence and said, now my last creation, he said, I am pleased with it, and I want it to be governed according to my will, that everything will be fine and continue to be a good place. Everybody is going to be happy. And for fear that things might not go just right, he wanted these overseers to take charge down here upon the earth. And he gave them the instructions to come down and do it. 4 of them in the skies or in the heavens above the earth, 4 of them on the earth, 4 within the earth itself, and also in the waters or on the waters. So as these appointed ones were going to descend to the new creation, they seemed to ask among each other, well, what language are we going to speak? And some kind of created quite an argument about what language they would speak when they got here. And seemingly there was one in the group that was the elder of this certain appointed group, and he said, well, of course we're going to talk Ho-Chunk. So the word Ho-Chunk, first we have to sort of tear it up to see what we will arrive at. Ho, in the Winnebago language, refers to the voice. It can also mean fish if you're talking about fish or water creatures. In the different languages, like the Sioux, they have a suffix on it. They call it ho-ran. And in the Omaha, they call a fish ho-ho or hoo-hoo. So in those two languages, they call the Winnebagos hotanka or hutanga, which means a big voice. Some want to translate it and say they call the Winnebagos big fish. That is not so. Now that we've got back to the Winnebago word ho-chunk. Ho, we found out, means pertains to the voice. But this chunk word in there, now we have to look back further into the language, the usage of chunk. We come to the word wolf. Wolf belongs to the dog family, so that's shunk. And so, but a wolf is called a shunk chunk. It's a dog, but with this chunk on there, it's quite a special dog. And we go to a subject where I might talk about a boxer. Take, for instance, Muhammad Ali. He himself, he says, I was the greatest. Fine, he's a good boxer. But if Winnebago was talking about Muhammad Ali saying he's the greatest, he would say, Kira chunk chunk jade. He is praising himself. Now, this is where we start talking about this word chunk. It has to do with making the subject big. So we say shunk chunk is a big dog. Ho chunk has a big voice. Now, if a child was given to crying and so forth, maybe one parent's busy over here, the other one's over here. Ijaru chanchangare, that means, sort of you humor the baby, so it'll quit crying. So what do you do when you take a baby in your arms and it's a little bit upset? You sort of kind of pet it and give it little names and even talk baby talk if you think that's the right thing to say. You distract it from its worries or whatever is making it cry, it thinks, and now it recognizes that you are noticing him. Well, if you do chunk him, you make him feel a little bit bigger than he is. So in other words, you are praising him. And so the word chunk has the inference of praise to make something bigger than it is. And so now we come to the word ho-chunk. These spirits or the helpers of Mauna, before they came down, they said, of course we're going to talk ho-chunk. That's the language we're going to speak, meaning the language of praise. So they came on down, or maybe they came sideways, or wherever Mauna sits. From that kingdom, why they came to oversee the world here, the creation. And so when they got here, they began to give each other their orders where they're going to find themselves to communicate with one another if they needed help in that area. And these that walked on two legs were also speaking a language, and they listened, and they could understand. So in the beginning, the language spoken here, according to the Ho-Chunks, was the Ho-Chungoite, the language or the speaking of the Winnebago, as we say it today, but it was the speaking of the language of praise. And so the Ho-Chunk was the voice of praise. Some have, it depends on from what position you speak. I seem to be brought up under a certain influence, and so maybe by that others might disagree with me, that this means the voice of praise. The other is greater than I. And this comes from the thinking or the teaching that religion is personal. What you think of your super God or your God is absolutely what you think between yourself and the Creator. So it was in the Winnebago. The ancient belief was that it was an individual thing, and you had to be true to yourself in order to be true to your Creator. And so to contain or keep this sustained conscientiousness of who you are the special center of His attention because you're truthful. And you are praising Him by the way you live, by what you say. And it had been said that even in anger, one of your neighbors, maybe you put out with him, you would like to punch his nose and call him all kinds of names, but you did not in those days. Instead, you verbally chastised him by praising the Creator, because it's His business to take care of somebody that's out of line. So that introduces the Winnebago to the audience, this audience, as what the meaning of Ho-Chunk means. That's my explanation of it. Others might say it was a voice of authority because other people being tutored in their younger days seem to have leaned more towards being the warriors and so forth. They enhance the idea of being great warriors to rule people. In fact, according to the stories that I've heard from my elders, the Winnebagos, you might say, were developed to a state where they were the Nazis of the American Indians at one time. In Paul Radin's book and several old stories, which Paul got a hold of, it's recorded that one time the Winnebago people were so ornery that the smaller tribes rose up against them and annihilated the male population, save one little boy. Now that's another story. Now that is because of the warrior feelings amongst the people got so great, overshadowed this other, the voice of praise. The religious, I don't know whether I should say religious, it's their way of life. They lived what they believed. one time when I used to work, I religiously got to the job as close as 8 o'clock in the morning and religiously stayed there on the job till 5 days a week. So that's religion there. Well, maybe I'm using it wrong here and saying the Indian religion. So now in finishing this part, what Ho Chunk means, I hope I made it plain. My idea of what the word Ho Chunk means, I transferred to you, and why. Why it is the voice of praise and not a big fish. In conjunction with this, I would like to add a little more here. The name of Mauna, the earth maker. We speak of him as Mauna when we talk about the earth. And if we talk about him as the creator, then we say Wagunzara, which means a designer. But then if we talk about the soul of men and people, we have him in connection with the soul, then we would have to use the word Wahopini Khatara, which gathers the souls of men. He deals with the souls. So he has 3 names, parallel to some other beliefs. But that's Mauna, that's telling it like it is. He creates the earth. He made the earth. We say Wagunzara, he's the designer. And so when you come to, again once more, that he was a Wahopini, it is a being of some sort, like a super angel, or even greater than that, but that he's put in that area that's spiritual. He deals with the souls of people then. I think in conjunction with this here, I will tell a story on a term that the Winnebagos know of ancient times. It is called rohampot eki, where the whole body is deadened suddenly. It's in the story began with 2 little boys, one born to this household, another one born to this household, and they happened to be kind of special to these parents, like all children are to their parents, but they begin to develop rapidly, and of course going through the process of growing up, you have to crawl first. So as they crawled around the fireplace, that's not the fireplace that you think I'm talking about. The lodge was probably made out of bark lodge, the bark lodges, which was a circular structure with the middle top left open so that the smoke from the fireplace, which is centrally located in the lodge, the smoke would rise and escape through the opening in the top. So that was the fireplace, and just for a little more information, that was called the grandfather. Ritually speaking, the fireplace, or the fire itself, was called the grandfather. And so these babies grew up to the point where they begin to crawl, and so they would creep around the fireplace. And a little later on, they crawl a little further. They'd crawl to the doorway and probably sit in a doorway, maybe perspiring and probably rubbing their little dirty hands over there to wipe the sweat, and what a dirty face there were. Such. And their ability to creep and so forth got pretty good, so they'd come sort of creeping rapidly out of their lodge out into the open and begin to look at the outside world. And probably one little chap looked across and seen the other one sitting over there. They were looking at each other. But finally they learned to walk and toddle around, and they begin to play with each other, their playmates. And so they developed a close bond. They were friends. And as they developed, one became very outspoken. He was a talkative little fellow, and the other one was somewhat reserved, and he didn't always chatty as the other. So they developed into a set of very close friends. And in the old Indian teaching is, you dare not call somebody friend if you are not willing to put your life at stake for him. There was this love developed that before you could call someone a friend. So Indians honor that word, my friend, in the ancient times, a word of close bondage. So it said that they became friends, and they went, say, around 10, 11, 12, they had to go through the rituals of the boys in fasting and seeking a vision to find out maybe a direction for what they would do throughout life. And as they became men, they became very great hunters. In fact, they were schooled in warfare, and so they become quite fearsome warriors of the place. And in fact, they were given the honor of protecting the village. So there were times when war parties would come to the village, and the alarm was set out, and knowing where the enemy was centrally located, why the two friends would shout at one another. He said, you take that side, I'll take this one. And so they would sort of maneuver around in a outside pincher sweep like and come in on the enemy and would save the day and drive the enemy out, what was left of them. And so their reputation went far and wide across the land, not to lock tomahawks with these guys. At about this time, why, the population of the Ho-Chunks increased. Since this is a story of the Winnebagos, we consider that we're talking, they were the only people that was living, and the population increase was so rapid that Mauna, wherever he sits and gazes on his creation, he saw that he had made a mistake. I'm going to correct this. If population increases at this rate, there will soon be an overpopulation, and the people will become hungry. There will not be as many game animals to feed them, their plants and so forth. There'll be too many hungry people there and not enough food. So he said, I got to do something about it. And if a person dies, supposedly his soul wanders around for maybe 4 years or so, because there's different ideas on it. So we have these wakes, annual feed or gathering together. It's part of the extenuating circumstances from the death of a person, going through 4 nights of wakes and so forth and being buried. But his soul is still going to be around for the next 4 years, or he's traveling and he'll come back. So the annual celebration of calling the people together to continue this wake happens every now and then. They have a feed and call their friends together in memory of the departed one. And so then annually for 4 years they do this. Mauna's sitting up there. He said, I've got to make this a little different deal. So he said, I'm going to have to cause someone to be the messenger, to take this word and spread it among the people. And so his plan involved these 2 friends. And right there, may I say that using today's slogans and so forth, the Lord's work is not done until you involve yourself in it to carry on his work. So now in this story, it brings that right to home that he was trying to get this message to the people. And so there was another war party come to this village, and here Mauna's going to put this plan into action. So as they did before, he'd holler to his friend. He said, you take that side, I'll take this side. And so they begin to have their battle. And the talkative one who lived over here, as he was running along there, he thought he tripped. He stumbled over something. And so it was with this friend over here. As he ran into battle, he tripped over something. And so I guess the rest of the day they had a great time out there on the battlefield. But somehow the enemy was driven off. They gave up and they were driven off, and so they 2 friends met out there and said, well, probably put their arms over each other's shoulder and said, well, we had a good go today. You know, he said, I'm kind of hungry, after this exercise we had. Let's go to my house. So his friend said, okay. And they went to the talkative one's home, and there sat the father and mother mourning. They had their face rubbed with charcoal. The fire was about to die out, just very few coals there. And so the 2 boys came in and sat down and said, hey, we're home now. We're hungry after that exercise we had. But these elders just sat there and stared into the fireplace. And when they had this mark of charcoal on their face, that meant that they were in mourning or in deep concentration. So after sitting there a while, the boy, the one who didn't talk so much, he said, hey, let's go to my place. He said, man, things might be better over there. So they got up and left the lodge of the talkative one's place and went over to the other place, and same thing was going on over there. Their parents were there, were in a mournful situation. They had their face marked with the charcoal, and they were gazing into the fireplace. And so, well, Mother, we're home and we're hungry. Will you feed us? But it was so that they didn't hear them or hear anyone say anything except these two guys. Hey, he said, something happened. I don't know what it is. They won't talk to us. Well, we'll forget about it. Let's lay down and go to sleep. I'm tired. So that's where they slept. And next morning he got up and the folks still sitting there. Something happened there. Say, let's go out to look in the playground, see what we can find. We got to find an answer to this. So as it where the talkative one fell, why, when they got to that place, why, there was his body. He says, let's go see where you fell. So went over to where the guy said he fell, and there laid the other body. I said, no wonder they wouldn't pay attention to us. He said, we're spirits. Well, he said, I guess so. There's our bodies. They must have killed us. We're just spirits. Well, I say, let's go find out what happened. So they supposedly went into the realm of the underground and searched out there, and they even traveled underwater. They couldn't find no answer there, so when they came back on dry land, the talkative one says, hey, he says, I know where the guy that knows is up there. Here we've been searching all over for the answer, and we can't get it here. I'll bet it's up there. I don't care what you're going to do. He said, I'm going to go up there and ask him myself. So the sort of reserved one says, hey, my friend, I'm going to go with you. I'm just as interested in this as you are. I want to know what happened. Before this, he said, into battle, he said, that was a lot of fun, and I never failed. But this time, I was caused to stumble. Now I want to find out why. Well, that's what we want. So, however they do, they went up there. The spirits can do that. So, and they came up there to the place where the one that knows it all, the all-knowing one, and that was a beautiful place. The air was calm, the skies were blue, sunshine, everything. Everything was beautiful, all the plants and flowers and so forth. A wonderful place. And there sat the lodge of the one who knows. In other words, that was Mauna that was there. And so, well, let's go. And he saw them just as they came. Supposedly, he said, now my mission is messengers have come. And so he just thought, he said, welcome, children, what brings you here? Without a word being spoken. Just by thinking these things, they understood each other, and so the boys answered back by thinking what they were going to say, and that in battle we used to be successful, but today we were permitted to stumble, and we were looking for that answer. So it was that Mauna, by mental telepathy, conversed with these boys, that he had decreed that they should come because he had no one else to send. And because they had enjoyed life so much down there, he was pretty sure that he could talk these boys into carrying message for him to the people. So it was, he explained that the world was being overpopulated, and soon there would be hunger and hard times come upon them. And for them, if their choice was to return back to Earth and their people, was to carry this message. And there's also a reward for it. To be brave all the time and to not fear to die in battle, for this is what's going to happen as soon as a warrior is killed on a field of battle, and this is where the word rohamboteki is connected with, that as soon as he is wholly killed on the battle, his soul will return to the Maker, his Maker. And he also has a choice of remaining with him or to be reincarnated back amongst his own people. Now that the people would have to, or mankind should practice self-control and measure oneself with abilities and so forth with the other. That is saying a whole lot of things. That means that one understands that the other, his neighbor, is equal to him in all things, like our Constitution said, we hold these truths to be, etc., etc., all men are created equal. And so to be equal, you would have to also act that the other ones are equal, not to overstep your authority because you would infringe on someone else's right, to measure fully each other's privileged rights and so forth. This is what that word, or the statement, we kigons that our shurupimi gi, the gi on there, it's if you know, will follow this. And so with the increase of population was a kind of a worry something would happen if it just continued. So now they had have to practice self-control to not to hold down the population increase, slow it down, so that always there would be plenty of food, and famine and starvation should hit the people. So he said, what are you going to do to the boy, said the all-knowing one. And of course the talkative one thought back to him and said, well, as for me, I'm going back. My friend, you can do as you want to. So the friend also thought in answer to this question, well, I'm your friend, I'm going to go wherever you go. Said, I too am going to return. So the all-knowing one answered them in thought, that's fine, that's what I wanted you to do. It fits right into my plan. And so he permitted them the permission to come back and be reincarnated by a process. Now this is what you're going to do. He said, you can't return to your homes as you left them. You cannot go back there. But what you will have to do is when you return to your village is seek out a newly wedded couple. And when you make your choice, you stay there close by, and so when the woman of the house makes her meal and so forth, and she's ready to take a bite and so forth, you jump into her food. And so by that manner, then you will enter her body, and in due time, she will give birth to a child, and you will be reincarnated. So that's what the two friends did when they came back. They choose, Al, I'm going over here, and I like this couple. So again, the process of a child being born and creeping around the fireplace and outside a little bit and learning to walk. And finally, these two got together and so said, "Did you recognize me, my friend?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I saw you sitting over here, just like old times." So fine. So they grew up together, went through the fasting and so forth. They still had, they remembered what went on before, so they were pretty expert at that by now. And again, once more, they become the good hunters and the warriors of the village. And so after a day or so, some strenuous exercise, why, this two friends got together again as they walked along. Hey, for a change, let's go and see our old fathers and mothers. Yeah. So they went to visit the talkative one's parents, who were still in mourning because of the loss of their son, who they loved very much, and they hit him pretty hard. They were still in this state of mourning. It would be quite a few years, but this is a story, so I guess it did happen. So for the story's sake, now they sat there. One came in and sat down, and so the old man nudged his wife and said, "We have some visitors." At least they thought we were people. We were honored by this visit. They brought honor to our household. Why don't you not stir up something, soak something, and make something to eat and feed our guests? So she got up and started the fire, and they got this food. Maybe it was dry corn, made soup or something, and fed the guests. So there was hardly anything said because of the visit, you know. So after they got through eating, it's best to talk after you got a little something in your belly, I guess. And so the talkative one says, "Father, this is me. I'm Sonny, or Junior, or whatever name he went by." So the old man, he read back and looked him over, and sure enough, there was something about him he recognized. Hey, Mrs., you better go and get the nephews to get over here, and we're going to put up a big feed and celebration. Our son is home. Well, we want to talk to my friends' folks, too. Well, that's all right. We'll bring them all together. So at this great celebration of the return of these here, and they also had to introduce the young mothers, and presently being their mother and father, and they had them there too. And so the story of what he who knows all things, the message that he ordered them to bring back was that this was told at this time, that as soon as a man serving his people, his country, and is killed on the field of battle, there's no worry about where his soul is going to go. It returns to the giver of life.